blue light from the computer screen was the only thing illuminating my cramped room. The smell of old coffee and stale air clung to my nostrils, but I was too used to it to be bothered. I sat there, hunched over my worn-out swivel chair, my fingers mindlessly tracing the scroll wheel of the mouse. This was my nightly ritual, a pilgrimage into the dark corners of the internet, where anonymous users shed all ethical barriers to expose humanity's darkest depths. The random bulletin board flickered before my eyes with thousands of lines of text scrolling by, mixed with pornography, senseless memes, and extreme political debates. I scrolled through it all with the callous indifference of someone whose emotions had been deadened, at least until that photo appeared. It was nestled among a forest of junk posts, with no sensational headline, no capitalized warnings often seen, just a high-quality picture and a short, chilling caption that made my finger freeze in midair. The photo was of a woman. She was lying on a bed, her neck twisted unnaturally to one side. Her skin was pale, and bruised patches stood out against the white complexion, especially around her neck. Her eyes were wide open, staring intently into the lens, or rather at the person holding the camera, with a look of eternal horror frozen in place. I had seen hundreds, even thousands of photos of corpses online. Most were images from accidents, war zones, or clumsy cosplay jokes, but this picture was different. It lacked the false drama of cinema. There was no splattered blood, no staged lighting, only the terrifying stillness of real death. The status accompanying the photo was short, cruel, and technical. Turns out strangling someone is much harder than in the movies. My heart started to beat faster, not out of fear, but from the morbid curiosity ingrained in the blood of internet night dwellers like me. I scrolled down to the comments section. Other users began to react in the usual way. They mocked it, called it fake, a cheap setup, or made indecent remarks about the victim's appearance. It was the defense mechanism of the anonymous crowd. They refused to believe the truth to protect what little humanity they had left, or simply for entertainment. But I didn't laugh. I opened the photo in a new tab, zoomed in as much as possible to examine every pixel. I looked for signs of Photoshop, clumsy edits, or obvious makeup. There was nothing. The pale skin had the depth of reality. The tiny hemorrhages in the victim's eyes were details that few fakers would pay attention to, and most importantly, the image data. I downloaded the picture, throwing it into the EXIF data reader software. The information appeared instantly. The photo had been taken less than 30 minutes ago with a new generation smartphone. The GPS coordinates had been deleted, but the time perfectly matched the present moment. The poster continued to update. He didn't care about the insults or doubts below. He wrote the next line, still with a calm tone as if describing a trip to the supermarket. She resisted quite violently. Accompanying it was another picture. This time, a close-up of the victim's hand, broken fingernails and fresh, oozing scratches on the arm of the person holding the camera. The blood was still wet. My stomach clenched. This was no joke. I was looking at the scene of a murder, right when the body hadn't even gone cold. The killer was sitting there, perhaps right next to the corpse, using his own phone to boast about his conquest to a crowd of invisible spectators. He wanted validation. He wanted us to become the reluctant witnesses to his crime. I switched to another tab, opening a website that allowed me to listen in on police radio frequencies. I didn't know the exact location, but based on the vague IP area code that a few other cyber detectives in the thread had just found, I narrowed the area down to Washington State. I tuned into the local police radio channel, and the static of the radio waves and the distorted voice of the dispatcher filled the quiet room. Meanwhile, the forum thread began to explode. The initial suspicion had turned into a chaotic mix of horror and excitement. Hundreds of new comments appeared every second. Some people started looking for the victim's personal information based on objects in the room. A receipt on the table, a family photo hanging on the wall. The power of the crowd's intellect was terrifying. Within just 15 minutes, they had found the girl's name, Amber. The killer was still there, watching us. He posted one more message. I have to go. The police might be coming soon. I'm leaving the phone here. I shivered. He was playing a cat-and-mouse game. He knew we were hunting him, and he enjoyed it. I listened intently to the police radio. Initially, it was just announcements about traffic violations or petty thefts. But then, the dispatcher's voice became tense. There was a report of a missing car in the Port Orchard area. The car belonged to a woman named Amber. The coincidence sent a chill down my spine. I quickly typed what I heard into the chat box, but the text was swept away in the chaotic sea of comments. No one cared about me. Everyone was busy dissecting the photos, turning a human death into a real-time entertainment show. I felt sick, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the screen. I was part of this crowd, a silent accomplice. On the screen, another user had found the victim's social media accounts. They began to spam it with trite condolences, and even the crime scene photos that the killer had just posted. The cruelty of the virtual world had no limits. I looked at the girl's smile in the old pictures, full of life and hope, then looked at the lifeless corpse in the bulletin board. The contrast ravaged my mind more than any horror movie. Suddenly, a new message from the killer appeared, this time without a picture. "Check the news. They're coming." I switched to the local Washington news website. No articles yet, but on Twitter, a few local reporters began posting about a suspected homicide at an apartment complex in Port Orchard. Police were sealing off the scene. The time matched down to the minute. I returned to the bulletin board. The killer had gone silent, but the story wasn't over. He had fled. He was out there, driving the victim's car, perhaps scrolling through this very forum on his phone to see our reaction. The thought gave me goosebumps. He wasn't a monster from a legend or a brilliant serial killer from a detective story. He was an ordinary person, someone who could be a neighbor, a colleague, or one of the anonymous names commenting enthusiastically. The police radio blared more urgently. They had spotted the car. The chase began. I sat there, clutching the mouse so tightly that my knuckles were white. I heard the siren wailing through the computer speakers, warnings about speed, about the direction of travel. In my mind, I pictured him speeding down the dark highway, his eyes bloodshot looking in the rearview mirror, while his mind was still immersed in the aftertaste of strangling a life. Why did he do it? The question kept repeating in my head. Why post it here? He wanted fame. He wanted to prove his existence by taking away the existence of another. He chose this place because he knew we would spread it, would make it immortal in the digital world. And we did exactly that. We gave him the stage he craved. The night was fading. The gray light of dawn began to creep through the curtains, competing with the blue light of the screen. The killer was not yet caught, but he had gone silent. The thread on the forum began to be diluted by new news, new jokes. The photos of Amber's corpse began to sink to the bottom, making way for other garbage content. That was the rule of this place. Everything was temporary, even death. I closed the police radio tab. The sudden silence that enveloped the room made my ears ring. I looked at the black screen as the computer went into sleep mode. My reflection appeared faintly on the black glass. Dark circles under my eyes, a haggard face. I wondered if I was any different from the people out there. I hadn't called the police. I hadn't done anything. I just sat and watched, analyzed, and consumed the pain of others as a mental snack. I stood up and walked out of the room. My legs were stiff from sitting too long. I went to the bathroom and splashed cold water on my face. The icy feeling helped me sober up a bit, but it couldn't wash away the feeling of filth clinging to my mind. The image of the girl's bruised throat haunted me. Turns out strangling someone is much harder than in the movies. The sentence echoed in my head like a curse. It reminded me how thin the line between the virtual world and reality was. Just one insane intention, one moment of losing control, and the monster from the screen would step out into real life. A few days later, the news officially confirmed that David Kallick had been arrested after turning himself in at a police station in Oregon. He walked out of the woods, exhausted and accepting his fate. But for me, the story ended that night when his last status update appeared. I never went back to that bulletin board again. I deleted all my browsing history, and I even deleted the photo analysis software. But I knew that no matter how much I erased the digital traces, the memory of that night would never disappear. I still live, still go to work, still blend into the bustling crowd. But every time I see someone absorbed in their phone on the subway, or see blue light emanating from the window of an apartment late at night, I shiver. I wonder what they are looking at. Is it a cute cat, a piece of current news, or the confession of another killer waiting to be heard? This world is vast, and darkness is everywhere, lurking right behind the glowing pixels that we look at every day. And the scariest thing is, when we realize we can't stop looking into it. The persistent rain of the Pacific Northwest poured down on the corrugated iron roof, creating a steady, lulling sound. My rented room was shrouded in darkness, save for the glowing rectangle of the old computer screen. It was late at night, the hour when sleepwalkers and lonely souls sought out the internet as a painkiller. I belonged to the second group. I was a robot, the term we used for ourselves on this R9K board, a gathering place for those who failed at social interaction, those left behind by the current of life. I scrolled the mouse unconsciously. Hundreds of threads passed before my eyes every night. Stories lamenting lost love, loneliness, warped philosophies about society and misogyny. It was a black hole of negative emotions, but it was also home, the only place where I felt I wasn't lost because there were thousands of others just as miserable as me. A new thread popped up, pushing the other lines of lamentation down. It had no sensational headline, no pornographic images or funny memes often seen, just a gloomy picture and a short, chilling caption that made my finger freeze. Some of you guys are all right. Don't go to school tomorrow if you're in the Northwest. I squinted and reread the line, a warning, or a joke. In this place, the line between truth and trolling was as thin as a thread. People threatened suicide, murder, and bombings every day just to get a few responses, a little bit of pathetic attention. I had seen tons of posts like that. Usually I would scroll past or type a mocking line like, "Do it, coward," the way this community operated. Cruelty was our common language. But this time, something felt different. The poster's next line appeared, "What happens tomorrow will be in the news. Farewell, space robots." I stared at the screen. There was no anger, none of the agitation usually found in the manifestos of young men seeking revenge on life. His tone was calm, resigned, and possessed a terrifying determination. It sounded like the last words of someone who had meticulously planned their final day. Below the post, the comments started jumping continuously. The crowd's reaction was clearly divided into two streams. Half mocked him, called him delusional, daring him to do it. The other half, more frighteningly, encouraged him. They offered advice on weapon selection and how to move to inflict maximum damage. Remember to bring plenty of ammo. Don't let the normies escape. Write my name on a bullet. I shuddered, although I knew that most of the people typing those lines were just overweight guys in their mother's basement, typing to release their helplessness. This collective toxicity still twisted my stomach. He was being hailed as a martyr hero, someone who dared to carry out the uprising they always dreamed of but never had the courage to do. I wanted to type something, a word of dissuasion or a question, but my fingers were stiff on the keyboard. If I showed seriousness, I would be called a hypocrite, an outsider. The unwritten rule of 4chan was never to be serious. Everything was a joke until it wasn't. I looked back at the word Northwest. I was also in the Northwest. The rain was still falling heavily outside the window, as if trying to submerge the whole city in gloom. There were hundreds of schools in the American Northwest. Which one was he talking about? University of Washington, Portland Community College, or some anonymous high school? The vagueness amplified the fear. I opened a new tab, navigating to the FBI's website. The cursor blinked at the section for reporting cybercrime. I hesitated. If this was just a bored 15-year-old kid's joke, I would look like an idiot for calling the police. But if it was real, images of past shootings flashed in my mind. Columbine, Virginia Tech, Sandy Hook, the victims' faces, the wailing sirens, the yellow tape cordoning off the scene. Finally, I closed the FBI tab. I convinced myself that this was just online garbage. He was just an attention whore. I turned off my computer, climbed into bed, and pulled the blanket over my head, trying to block out the rain and the dark thoughts creeping into my mind. The next morning came with the typical gray sky. I woke up with a heavy head, the lingering effect of a restless sleep. The anxiety of the night before seemed to have faded under the daylight. I made a cup of coffee and turned on the TV for the morning news while getting ready for work. Boring reports about traffic, weather, and local politics. Nothing unusual. I breathed a sigh of relief. See, you were just worrying over nothing. It was just another sick online joke. I went to my job, a dull office job that I used to pay the rent and feed this useless body. The whole morning passed peacefully. I entered data, answered emails, and occasionally checked my phone discreetly. In the early afternoon, the atmosphere in the office suddenly changed. A few colleagues whispered to each other. The phones rang incessantly. I saw my boss turn on the wall-mounted TV in the main hall. A red banner with the words "Breaking News" ran across the screen. Shooting at Umpqua Community College, Oregon. My heart skipped a beat. Oregon, Northwest. I rushed to the television screen. Helicopter footage showed police surrounding the school campus, panicked students running out with their hands raised, ambulances speeding away with heart-wrenching sirens. The death toll was unconfirmed, but the number of casualties was high. My ears rang. All the surrounding sounds seemed to be sucked into a vacuum funnel. In my head, only the invisible voice of the guy from last night echoed. Don't go to school tomorrow if you're in the Northwest. He really did it, he wasn't joking. And we, that entire trash community, had known beforehand. We had read the warning, some people had even wished him luck. Trembling, I pulled out my phone and accessed 4chan using mobile data. The thread from last night had been deleted, but a series of new threads had sprung up like mushrooms after rain. The people there were celebrating. They called the shooter a saint, a brother. They compared the death toll with previous cases as if they were comparing scores in a video game. He actually did it. Beta uprising has begun. I told you that guy wasn't kidding. Disgust rose to my throat. I rushed into the restroom, throwing up violently. Morning coffee and acrid stomach acid poured out, carrying with it horror and remorse. I looked at my face in the mirror, pale and covered in sweat. I was a witness. No, worse, I was a silent accomplice. I had seen the warning. I could have done something. I could have saved someone, but I chose silence. I chose to believe it was a joke to protect my own false peace. I returned to my desk, but I couldn't focus on anything. The numbers on the screen danced before my eyes. The news was constantly updating. 10 dead, 7 injured. The shooter was dead after exchanging fire with the police. He had committed suicide or been shot down. It no longer mattered. He had achieved his goal. He had made it onto the evening news just as he had promised. That evening, I returned to my rented room. The rain had stopped, but the air was colder than ever. I turned on my computer, not to browse the web, but to find traces. Cyber detectives, and even the press had begun posting screenshots of the post from last night. It spread everywhere as a testament to the savagery of the internet's underworld. I read that the police were investigating the IP addresses that accessed that post. They were hunting down those who had encouraged him. I knew I hadn't commented. I was only lurking, but an invisible fear clung to me. Was silence a crime? I looked at the black screen of R9K. Still the same interface, still the same threads of lamentation and insults, as if nothing had happened. The blood of 10 people had been spilled, a school had been ravaged, dozens of families broken, but here, life continued in its distorted way. The anonymous users continued to laugh, continued to glorify violence, continued to nurture the next monsters in the guise of failures. Chris Harper Mercer, that was the name announced later. A young man withdrawn, loved guns and hated religion. He was exactly like the archetypes we saw every day on this forum. He was one of us. That truth chilled me more than anything else. That the monster was not far away. He was sitting right next to us in the virtual space, laughing at meaningless memes, waiting for the moment to pull the trigger. I moved the mouse to the browser off button. This time, I didn't just close the tab. I deleted the bookmark. I deleted the history. I unplugged the network cable. I sat in the darkness, listening to my own breathing. The silence in the room was no longer peaceful. It was heavy as lead. I knew I would never be able to look at an online comment with the same carefree eyes again. Behind every anonymous name, behind every joking threat, there might be a loaded gun and a trembling finger on the trigger. And the scariest thing is, I know that out there, in the darkness of rented rooms just like this one, there are still thousands of others reading those inflammatory lines, nurturing hatred and waiting for their turn to appear on the evening news. Some of you guys are all right. That sentence will haunt me for the rest of my life, because in that moment, he considered me and all the other silent ones his kind. My phone screen lit up in the dark, signaling a new message from Discord. It was the only light in this cramped studio apartment where I had confined myself for the entire weekend. I rubbed my eyes, trying to shake off the early morning sleepiness to read the lines scrolling quickly in the chat channel. We were a small group, outcasts who found each other through a shared passion for emo culture and dark, artistic photography. Bianca was the brightest star here. She had a strange allure, a fragile glass-like beauty that everyone wanted to protect or possess. Today, she was at a concert in New York, Nicole Dollanganger. I remembered clearly because she had talked about it all week. She went with Brandon. I never liked that guy. He had a sullen look, a possessive longing that exuded from the comments he left on her profile. He was the type of person who always tried to prove he was important, that he was the only one who understood her. But Bianca was too kind or too naive. She considered him a friend. A friend willing to drive her to her favorite show. I slid my finger across the screen, scrolling through old messages. Her last message was in the evening, a blurry photo of the stage with an excited caption. After that, silence. I reassured myself that they were driving back. The drive from Queens to Utica took a few hours. Maybe she had fallen asleep in the car. A new notification appeared, this time from Brandon. He sent a photo to the general chat channel. I frowned. Why now? Why an uncaptioned photo? I tapped to view it. The photo loaded slowly due to the patchy network connection. First, the dark background of the car interior. Then the color. Red, lots of red, and then her face emerged. My breath hitched in my throat. Bianca lay there, her head slumped back against the seat. Her throat. There was a deep, wide gash. Blood stained the shirt she was wearing, spilling onto the leather seat. Her eyes were still open, but the light in them was extinguished. I dropped the phone onto the mattress. No way. This was a joke, an early Halloween costume, or a scene from some horror movie they were watching. Brandon often did weird things for attention. This must be one of them. I picked up the phone with trembling hands. I wanted to type a message cursing him for this sick joke, but my fingers couldn't move. Below the picture, a short line appeared from Brandon's account. Sorry, Bianca. Then, here comes hell. The chat channel erupted in chaos. The other members who were online started reacting. At first, it was confused emojis, jocular questions. What the heck, great makeup. But then silence fell as they realized the photo's authenticity. That color of blood, the depth of the wound, no amount of makeup could achieve that. I switched to Bianca's Instagram. Maybe she had just posted a story saying she was fine. Maybe she was home, laughing at us. But her last story was hours ago. Her silence was a cruel confirmation of the picture. I returned to Discord. Brandon was still online. He didn't answer anyone. He just posted one more photo. This time, a different, clearer, more brutal angle. He wanted us to see his work. He wanted an audience. I felt nauseous. My stomach clenched as if someone had punched me hard. I rushed into the bathroom, vomiting violently into the toilet. The sour aftertaste of bile rose in my throat. This was real. Bianca was dead. The girl we chatted with every day, the girl with the bright smile and dyed hair, was now just a lifeless corpse in that dark SUV. I had to do something. The police. Yes, I had to call the police. I picked up the phone, then froze. I didn't know where they were. I didn't know Brandon's license plate number. I only knew they were on their way back to Utica. I called 911 in my local area, but I was hundreds of miles away from them. The dispatcher's voice was steady, mechanical. I tried to explain in a panic about Discord, about the photo, about the name Brandon Clark. The person on the other end seemed confused. They didn't understand what Discord was. They asked if I had a specific address. Helpless, I hung up. I turned back to social media. I needed to find someone who knew Brandon well, knew where he lived. And that's when I saw the real nightmare begin. The photo had escaped our private group chat. It was spreading on 4chan, on Twitter, on Instagram. Anonymous users started sharing it at breakneck speed. They weren't sharing it to find justice. They were sharing it to mock. I saw tweets tagging Bianca's account. Rest in peace, accompanied by the very picture of her body. Others were crueler. They photoshopped her face into memes. They commented on her appearance even in death. Simp God enraged, serves e-girls right. The malicious words were like acid splashed onto the screen. I wanted to scream. I wanted to smash the phone. They were killing her again. They were turning a young girl's tragic death into cheap entertainment for a Sunday morning. I messaged every account that posted the photo, begging them to take it down. Please, her family will see this. One person replied to me, "Welcome to the internet." Helplessness overwhelmed me. I sat huddled on the cold floor, staring at the bright screen. What was wrong with this world? Why could people be so cruel? Bianca wasn't a character in a game. She was a human being. She had a mother, siblings, dreams that had not been fulfilled. On the Discord screen, Brandon's status changed to idle. He was still there. Was he reading these comments? Was he enjoying the morbid fame he had just created? He had achieved his goal. He had forever linked his name to Bianca's, a bloody connection that no one could erase. News started appearing on local news websites. Utica police had received multiple reports. They had found the car. I held my breath, reading every updated line. The black SUV was parked on a dead-end street. When the police approached, Brandon had stabbed himself in the neck with a knife. He was lying on a blue tarp covering Bianca's body. He had even taken a selfie with his own bleeding wound and posted it on social media before being restrained by the police. He wanted to die with her, or at least he wanted to create a dramatic ending for his tragedy. But he didn't die. Police rushed him to the hospital for emergency surgery. He lived. I let out a gasp, a mix of relief and hatred. He lived to face what he had done. Death was too easy for him. He had to live in prison, scorned by society. But Bianca's pain didn't end there. I opened her Instagram one last time. Her account was still open. The number of followers was skyrocketing by the second. Thousands of strangers flocked to follow a dead person. New comments constantly appeared beneath her old photos. Some were sincere condolences, but most were curious onlookers, people asking for crime scene photos, people tagging friends to see it as a bizarre phenomenon. Bianca's mother had to issue a plea for everyone to stop sharing the image of her daughter's body. A grieving mother's plea was drowned in a sea of information garbage. Social media platforms were too slow. Instagram took hours to remove those photos, but for every one that was deleted, 10 others popped up. Their algorithms couldn't distinguish between artistic photos and a crime scene, or perhaps they simply didn't care enough. I closed my laptop. The room plunged into the hazy darkness of the gloomy morning. I could hear the cars starting to run outside, the sound of life going on normally. People were going to work, buying coffee, laughing. No one knew that in that parallel virtual world, a soul had just been torn apart by a pack of digital vultures. I remembered Bianca's smile in our last video call. She was excited to show off the new dress she was going to wear to the concert. She said she wanted to go to college, to study psychology to help young people with mental health issues. She had a whole future ahead of her, and it was all taken away by a man who couldn't accept rejection and by a bloodthirsty crowd. I stood up and walked to the window. The sky outside was gray and heavy. I wondered if I would ever forget that picture, that haunting red color, those vacant eyes. It had been imprinted on my retina, becoming an indelible scar. I used to love the internet. I used to consider it a safe haven, a place where I could be myself. But now I only saw it as a battleground, where humanity was stripped away, leaving only primal cruelty. We connect with each other using fiber optic cables and Wi-Fi, but we have disconnected from our fellow humans' compassion. My phone vibrated, a message from another friend in the group. Did you see the news? That Brandon guy is alive. He's being charged with second-degree murder. I didn't reply. I looked down at the dark screen. I saw my reflection in it, distorted and faint. I wondered if one day I disappeared, would I become a hashtag, a topic of discussion, a photo shared for amusement. Brandon Clark killed Bianca Devins once with his knife, but we, the internet users, killed her 1,000 times more with likes, shares, and comments. We turned her tragedy into consumable content. I deleted the Discord app, deleted Instagram. I needed a break. I needed to step outside, touch the grass, breathe real air, to remind myself that this world still had real things, flesh and blood people who knew pain and love. But I knew that no matter where I ran, Bianca's ghost would still be there, lurking in the dark corners of the global network, reminding me of the price of connection. A young girl died, and the world simply scrolled past after satisfying its curiosity. Sorry, Bianca, the killer's apology was empty. But perhaps that was what all of us should say. Sorry we couldn't protect you. Sorry we turned your death into a spectacle. Sorry this world has become so cruel that there is no place for rest. It started raining outside. The raindrops hit the window glass like tears that never stop falling. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness of my mind, I tried to remember Bianca, not as the corpse in the car, but as the radiant girl under the stage lights, singing along to her favorite song, Forever 17. My cramped rented room was submerged in pitch black, the only light emanating from the constantly flickering computer screen. My eyes were dry after hours glued to lines of code and images scrolling past on the anonymous bulletin board. I was invisible, a digital phantom lurking in the darkest corner of the internet, a place called the nexus of the cyber universe, or simply B. This was the meeting point for the worst refuse, but also the birthplace of the strangest wonders. We had no names, no faces, just a colossal collective mind operating by chaotic rules that no one fully understood. Tonight, like any other, I scrolled through dozens of meaningless threads, memes, pornography, extreme political debates, and the complaints of the defeated. The sheer boredom was creeping into my nerves, making me consider shutting down the computer and going to sleep. But then a new thread appeared, the title short and provocative, accompanied by a YouTube video link. I clicked on it. The video was low quality, with the characteristic grainy image of cheap webcams from that era. In the frame was a messy teenage bedroom. A young boy appeared, his face youthful with a short haircut. He was grinning at the camera, an innocent smile that concealed a cruelty I didn't immediately recognize. Beside him was a black and white cat. It was curled up, completely unaware of the nightmare about to unfold. What transpired in the next few minutes churned my stomach. The kid began to torment the animal. He hit it, threw it against the wall, and performed other actions that I don't want to describe. The agonizing meows of the poor creature pierced through my old computer speakers, stabbing my eardrums. I turned off the video before it finished. A burning, fierce rage erupted in my chest. In this chaotic place, we could laugh at human suffering, mock death, and commit the most depraved acts. But there was an unwritten rule, an absolute red line that must not be crossed. Do not harm animals, especially cats. Cats were the internet's unofficial mascot, the lords of the meme world. Harming a cat was declaring war on this entire network. I returned to the bulletin board. I wasn't the only one who felt this way. The thread, which was deserted just moments ago, exploded at a frantic pace. Hundreds of comments appeared every second, all sharing the same emotion: fury. Professional trolls, black hat hackers, idle unemployed people, all simultaneously switched to hunting mode. The gigantic engine of retribution was starting up. We didn't need the police. We were faster than them. We were more numerous than them. And we were more ruthless than them. The first task was to identify the person in the video. Thousands of eyes were glued to every frame, scrutinizing every blurry pixel. A massive open-source investigation began. I downloaded the video, throwing it into editing software to increase the brightness and clarity. I rewound and played the beginning of the video repeatedly before the kid started his actions. I looked at the background. There were posters hanging on the wall. I took screenshots, cropped each poster, and put them into a reverse image search tool. The results came back quickly. They were posters for a local rock band and a high school football team. A critical clue: the football team belonged to a school in Oklahoma. The search scope was narrowed from global to a single state. At the same time on the forum, another user discovered a more valuable detail. The YouTube account that uploaded the video had a name hinting at a nickname. We started checking that nickname across every social media platform that existed at the time: MySpace, Facebook, gaming forums. This work required the patience and meticulousness of a seasoned detective, but we weren't working alone. While I was busy searching through the friend list of a suspicious MySpace account, someone else had found an eBay account with the same username. And from the transaction history on eBay, a real name was revealed: Kenny Glenn. Kenny Glenn, a name that sounded so ordinary, but now it was the target of thousands of unpaid bounty hunters. I typed the name into the Facebook search bar. A profile appeared. The profile picture was the face of the kid in the video. No mistake. The same haircut, the same arrogant smile, and most importantly, he was wearing the exact same t-shirt as in the abuse video. A rush of excitement ran down my spine. We found him. It took less than 2 hours since the video was posted. He thought he was anonymous. He thought uploading the video was just a fun joke to show off to his friends. He didn't know that he had just signed the death warrant for his own social life. But finding the name wasn't enough. We needed the address. We needed to make sure he paid the price legally, and the cat was rescued. The community went into deeper exploitation. From his Facebook profile, we found his school, his friends list, and even his home phone number. His address in Lawton, Oklahoma, clearly appeared on the satellite map. I looked down at his rooftop via Google Earth, wondering if he was sleeping soundly or gleefully rewatching his sick creation. Now was the time for real-world action. A flurry of users started calling the Lawton Police Department. I picked up my phone, too. Though I hated talking on the phone, this was necessary. On the other end was the tired voice of a dispatcher. They must have received dozens of similar calls in the past hour. I tried to present the information as concisely and clearly as possible. I talked about the video, the animal cruelty, and provided the suspect's full name and address. The officer sounded skeptical. He asked how I knew this information. I couldn't say I got it from an anonymous forum full of weirdos. I just said I found it on social media. He mumbled, took note of the information, and promised to send someone to check it out. I hung up, filled with anxiety. The police are often slow with internet-related cases. They might dismiss it as a joke, swatting, or not prioritize it, but we didn't stop there. The crowd's next tactic was far more ruthless. Kenny Glenn's information was sent to his school principal, to local newspapers, and to animal protection societies in the area. We wanted to make sure no one in Lawton was unaware of this kid's true face. The next morning, I woke up late after a long, stressful night. The The first thing I did was check the bulletin board on my computer. A new thread was pinned to the top with a proudly capitalized title, "We Did It." Accompanying it was a link to a KSWO local television news article. The headline hit me: Lawton teen arrested on animal cruelty allegations. I devoured every line. Police had raided Kenny Glenn's home that morning. They found the cat named Dusty. It was alive but injured and terrified. The animal was taken to a veterinarian for care and was currently stable. Kenny Glenn was charged with animal cruelty, a felony in Oklahoma. I breathed a sigh of relief, a feeling of satisfaction spreading through my chest. Dusty was safe. That was the most important thing. Below the article was a picture of Kenny Glenn being escorted to a police car, his face downcast, the arrogance from the video gone. He looked small and frightened. He had tasted the internet's wrath. His life from now on would be tied to the name cat abuser. Whenever someone searched his name online, that video and this conviction would pop up. He would never escape the shadow of his past. I returned to the forum to see everyone's reaction. The atmosphere was filled with celebration. The people who normally cursed and trolled each other mercilessly were now united like brothers in arms. We called ourselves heroes, although we knew we weren't. We were just a random, chaotic crowd that happened to do the right thing. But the joy was short-lived. Just a few hours later, the celebration threads began to drift downwards. The familiar junk content reclaimed the bulletin board. Pornography, racist memes, and pointless jokes resumed as if nothing had happened. The self-appointed justice machine had shut down, restoring the space to its usual chaos. I sat silently in front of the screen, watching the mouse pointer blink. I wondered about the power we held. In a single night, thousands of strangers had collaborated to ruin the life of a person on the other side of the country and rescue a cat. That was a terrifying power. It could be used for good, as it was today, but it could also destroy innocent people if misguided. We were the judge, the jury, and sometimes the executioner. I looked at the photo of Dusty taken by the vet staff. The cat was lying in a cage, its big, round eyes looking into the lens, fear still lingering, but at least it was safe. I smiled faintly. In this dark and hateful world, sometimes we, too, manage to do something meaningful. I closed the browser, stood up, and stretched. Outside the window, it was already getting dark. Another day had passed. Kenny Glenn was sitting at the police station, facing his consequences. Dusty was being treated. And I was back to being an anonymous phantom, preparing for another long night of aimless web surfing. I knew that tomorrow or next week, some other fool would anger this collective monster, and we would awaken again, hunt again, and enforce our own version of justice. But tonight, I could sleep soundly, because the cat was saved, and that was enough. I left my computer desk, stepped onto the balcony, and breathed in the cold night air. The city below was still glittering with lights, millions of people still living their lives, completely unaware of the silent war that had just taken place on the fiber optic lines beneath their feet. The real world and the virtual world ran parallel, but sometimes they collided with a terrifying force. And I, standing between those two worlds, could only silently observe and await the next storm. The computer screen was the only light guiding me in the room, saturated with the smell of cold cigarette smoke and solitude. I sat here, thousands of miles away from the state of Ohio, but my mind was threading through the rusted streets of Steubenville. This was a typical small American town, where the steel mills had long closed and the only religion left was high school football. There, the big red players were regarded as gods, and gods never made mistakes. Or at least, that was what the entire town wanted to believe. The incident started as a whisper online. A few angry tweets, some rumors on local forums, quickly deleted. But on the internet, nothing truly disappears. We, the anonymous figures behind digital Guy Fawkes masks, had a habit of collecting those discarded fragments. A 16-year-old girl, a drunken party, 2 football stars, and a terrifying silence that covered everything. I began my investigation not with a magnifying glass or fingerprints, but with SQL commands and social data mining tools. Twitter was the most public crime scene I had ever seen. These teenage perpetrators possessed a stupid arrogance. They didn't hide their crime in the dark. They boasted about it. They tweeted about it on the very night it happened, as if sexually assaulting a drunken girl was a scoring achievement on the field. I read those lines late one evening. Vulgar, misogynistic words demeaning women appeared on my plain black screen. "She's dead. We put her down." Their friends chimed in, laughing. An entire social network of that high school knew, but no one called the police. Instead, they mocked the victim. They called her a slut, that she deserved it. A chill ran down my spine, not from fear, but from disgust at human nature. I delved deeper. I didn't just want to read what they posted publicly. I wanted what they had deleted. The text messages, the photos sent back and forth in closed group chats. The security systems of a high school and loose personal accounts were no match for me. I walked through their firewalls as if through an unlocked door. The data began pouring in, gigabytes of evidence. I saw photos of the poor girl. She was dragged around like a ragged doll from party to party unconscious while the boys laughed and posed next to the living corpse. I looked into the eyes of the people in the photos. There was no remorse, only the excitement of bestiality and the absolute certainty that they would never be punished because they were Big Red. They were the town's pride. But what infuriated me the most was not those brats. It was the adults. As I read through the emails and messages of those in charge, I realized the scale of the cover-up. Local police, who should have protected the victim, had close ties to the football team. The school worried more about the team's reputation than justice for a female student. They wanted to bury the incident. They threatened those who dared to speak up. They created a dense wall of silence around the town, hoping the girl and her family would give up out of shame. They were wrong. They failed to account for us as a variable, a collective with no leader, no headquarters, and most importantly, no fear. That night I found the smoking gun of the case. It was a video clip, blurry quality, filmed in a shaky car. In the video, the attackers and their friends joked about the rape. They mimicked the act, burst into laughter, and repeated the victim's name in a cruelly mocking tone. She didn't know anything. Their laughter echoed, sharp and emotionless. I watched the video 3 times. Each time, my coldness increased a notch. This was not youthful recklessness. This was rottenness from the core culture of an entire community. I compressed the video, along with thousands of pages of documents, messages, and call logs I had collected. The campaign was ready. We called it Roll Red Roll, a sarcastic name for the football team's slogan that they adored. I didn't act alone. In the secure chat channel, dozens of other detectives were also working. One analyzed the timeline, another identified every person in the photos, and others prepared press releases to send to international media. We were about to tear open Steubenville's curtain of secrecy and expose its true face to the light of day. The next morning, the bomb exploded. We released all the data online. The car video spread like wildfire. The identities of the 2 main suspects, Trent Mays and Malik Richmond, flooded the news. Their sick tweets and those of their friends were screenshotted and posted everywhere. The hashtag about the case climbed to global trending topics. I leaned back in my chair, watching the chaos unfold on my screen. Steubenville High School's website was hacked and defaced. Threats and criticisms from all over the world poured into that small town. Local officials, who had been indifferent before, were now panicked. The police chief had to speak up. The Ohio Attorney General got involved. They had no other choice. The public pressure was too great, too overwhelming. They were forced to investigate, forced to do the job they should have done months ago. I saw the residents of Steubenville start to react, but instead of showing remorse, many of them turned to attack the victim and attack us. They called us cyber-terrorists. They said we were destroying the future of good boys. I read those defensive comments and felt a bitter amusement. The future of good boys. What about the future of the girl left on the roadside, naked and bruised? Who would mourn her future? The battle lasted for months. I continued to follow every development, but I didn't intervene further. My job was to bring the truth to light. The rest belonged to the legal system, although I had little faith in it. I watched the trial via livestream. I saw the 2 young boys, now wearing suits, bowing their heads in court. They no longer looked arrogant as they did in the photos I had hacked. They cried, or at least tried to look remorseful. The judge pronounced the verdict, guilty. A light sentence compared to what they had done, but at least it was a guilty verdict. They were sent to a juvenile detention center. Their records would bear the mark of sexual offenders. The Big Red team was no longer untouchable. The adults who covered up the incident were also exposed. Some lost their jobs, and others were prosecuted for obstructing justice and tampering with evidence. I closed the browser. The room returned to its inherent stillness. There were no celebratory fireworks, no feeling of glorious victory, only fatigue and emptiness. Justice had been served in a way, but it couldn't erase what happened to that girl. It couldn't erase the cruel tweets, the laughter in the video clip, or the fact that an entire town was ready to sacrifice a child to protect the reputation of a game. I looked down at my hands, the fingers that had typed the code that brought down an entire miniature empire. I wondered if I was a hero. No, I was just a janitor. I cleaned up the garbage that society deliberately ignored. I dragged the monsters out from under the bed and showed everyone how ugly they were. Steubenville was just one name in a long list of rotten towns. Tomorrow there will be another case, another girl, another cover-up, and I will be here again in this darkness with a blue screen and cold coffee, ready for a new hunt. I stood up, walked to the window, and parted the curtain to look outside. The world outside continued its own rhythm. Neighbors going to work, children going to school. They didn't know about the war taking place in cyberspace, where data and evidence were weapons, and honor was the only thing being massacred. I remembered the image of the victim. She had to change her name, move, and live with that trauma for the rest of her life. But at least she knew she wasn't alone, that when the whole world turned its back on her, there were invisible strangers in the dark who stood up for her. That was the only thing that made this work meaningful to me. I returned to my desk. The computer screen waited for me like a loyal, demanding friend. A new notification popped up from the chat channel. A new incident. A new cry for help from somewhere on the map. I sighed, pulled my chair closer to the keyboard. The life of a gray hat hacker never ends. We are the night watchmen, guarding a world that never sleeps and never stops being cruel. I typed the first command line. The next hunt began. The persistent autumn rain poured down on the tin roof of the dilapidated shed behind the garden. The sound of the rain was steady, monotonous, much like my own dull life in this forgotten Midwest town. I stood there, holding a heavy, cold object, its rough surface covered in rust. It was a grenade, an MK2 or pineapple grenade, a World War II-era weapon my late grandfather, a veteran, had left in this pile of junk. I found it while clearing out a stack of rotting cardboard boxes. It was nestled inside a greasy wooden box, alongside rusted wrenches and some old engine parts. Its weight surprised me. It was heavier than it looked, heavier than the model toys I used to hold. I ran my finger over the intact safety pin, the metal now reddish-brown but still retaining its deadly shape. I brought it inside. My room, the sanctuary of a 25-year-old unemployed man, greeted me with the familiar blue glow of a computer screen that was never off. I placed the grenade on my desk, right next to the keyboard littered with crumbs and a half-empty soda bottle. Its presence changed the atmosphere in the room. It was an object of violence, of history, and most importantly, it was a mystery. Was it still functional, or was it just a useless piece of iron with all the explosives removed? I did what any bored man in my situation would do. I took a picture. The flash went off, reflecting on the grenade's checkered surface. I accessed 4chan, specifically the B board, the gathering place of the world's craziest and most idle people. I created a new thread. The title was short, "Found this in my grandpa's junk. How do I know if it's live or dead?" I uploaded the photo and hit send. Then came the stimulating wait. Dopamine started pumping in my brain as red numbers appeared, signaling new comments. The community reacted instantly. The anonymous users began dissecting the photo. Some said it was fake, a paperweight bought at a souvenir shop. Others warned me to call the bomb squad immediately, but most, as I predicted, were challenges. Pull the pin, coward. Throw it in the microwave. Pics or it didn't happen. I sat reading every line, feeling like I was the center of attention. In this moment, I was no longer the anonymous unemployed guy. I was the original poster, the one holding an object capable of deciding life and death. A strange excitement coursed through my veins. One comment stood out with a beautiful ID sequence, doubles. He wrote, "If the tail of this post number is doubles, you must drop it in the toilet and flush. The water will prevent the explosion, trust me." I looked down at his post ID number. The last 2 digits were 77, fate. I picked up the grenade. The cold feel of the metal transmitted through my hand. The idea of dropping it in the toilet sounded insane, but there was a warped logic in my intoxicated mind, fueled by virtual fame. I'd heard somewhere that water pressure could contain an explosion, or at least minimize damage. Besides, seeing how old it was, chances were high it was just a rusted hunk of iron. The explosives inside must have long decomposed. I typed a new message. "All right, I'll do it. Give me 5 minutes." I carried my phone and the grenade into the bathroom. The white-tiled room was cold, the porcelain toilet sitting innocuously in the corner. I placed the grenade on the toilet lid and snapped another photo to prove I wasn't just talking. Back at the computer, I posted the picture. The thread exploded. Hundreds of people were watching live. They called me crazy, a legend, an idiot. The chaos of the crowd only fueled my excitement. I wanted to prove to them that I dared. I wanted to deliver the ultimate rule of this bulletin board. I returned to the bathroom. This time I closed the door. The confined space made my own heartbeat sound loud. I looked at the grenade in the palm of my hand. It was heavy. The safety pin was bent, as if challenging me. I took a deep breath. The musty smell of the bathroom filled my nostrils. I hooked my index finger into the pin's ring. It was stiffer than I thought. Rust had fused the parts together. I had to use more force. A dry click echoed. The layer of rust crumbled. The pin slipped out of the lever, falling onto the tiled floor with a small but jarring clang. Now only the spoon was held tightly by my palm. If I released my grip, the spring would deploy, the firing pin would strike the primer, and the delay fuse would start counting down. About 4 to 5 seconds. That was the time I had. I looked down at the toilet, the water clear and still. I reassured myself one last time. It had to be a dud. Grandpa wouldn't keep a live grenade in his toolbox. No way. I dropped the grenade into the water. As it left my hand, the spoon sprang away. A small snap sounded, like the click of a Zippo lighter. Then a tiny hissing sound, and bubbles started rising from the bottom of the toilet bowl. It was live. Time seemed to stop. In that instant, I realized my terrible mistake. This wasn't a toy. This wasn't a movie. This was the brutal reality. I instinctively retreated, but the room was too small. I only managed to turn my back, curl up to cover my head, and press myself into the corner by the sink. 1, 2, 3. The world exploded. No sound can describe that blast. It wasn't a boom or a bang like on TV. It was a massive physical pressure punching straight into my entire body. My ears felt like someone had pierced my eardrums with needles. A shockwave hurled me violently against the cabinet under the sink. Sharp shards of porcelain flew everywhere like a rain of daggers. Dirty water splashed onto the ceiling, the walls, and onto me. The searing pain hit immediately after. I lay sprawled on the soaking wet floor. Plaster dust was thick in the air. The acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with sewage fumes choked my lungs, making me cough violently. My ears were ringing, an unbearable, high-pitched whine that wouldn't stop. I struggled to open my eyes. The sight before me was horrifying. The porcelain toilet was completely gone. Only a gaping black hole remained in the floor, littered with broken tiles and a ruptured water pipe. The bathroom door was blown off its hinges, lying haphazardly in the hallway. The tiled walls were shattered, riddled with shrapnel holes from the grenade fragments and porcelain shards. I looked down at my body. My t-shirt was shredded. Blood started oozing from countless small cuts on my arms and back. My legs felt numb. A large shard of porcelain was embedded in my left calf, blood streaming down onto the white tiles, now stained red and black. I was alive. The thought surfaced slowly and with difficulty. I was actually alive. The grenade had exploded in the confined space of the toilet, and by some miracle, the water and the thick porcelain had absorbed part of the blast force, or the direction of the explosion had been deflected away from my position. The pain started to hit more clearly. My leg was throbbing. My ears hurt as if they were about to crack. But in that moment of panic and pain, another insane thought took hold of my mind. I had to post the picture. I had to show them the result. If I didn't post, they wouldn't believe it. I would be a liar. I crawled my aching body to find my phone. It had been thrown into the corner, the screen cracked but still lit. I tremblingly picked up the phone, aiming the camera at the explosion scene. My hand was covered in blood and dust, leaving prints on the phone's back cover. I photographed the battlefield, the black hole where the toilet used to be, the scattered debris, and my own bleeding leg. I crawled out of the bathroom, dragging my painful leg across the hallway's wooden floor. I returned to the computer desk. The screen was still on. My thread was still there. The comment count had risen to thousands. Everyone was asking where I was. They were counting down the time. R.I.P. up. He must be dead. Or he's trolling us. I connected the phone to the computer, my trembling fingers struggling to control the mouse. I uploaded the photo along with a short caption, quickly typed with one hand because the other was clutching the wound. Delivered, need to go to the hospital. The picture appeared. The bulletin board seemed to break. Lines of text rushed past too quickly to read. Holy S. He actually did it. Legend. Call an ambulance, you idiot. I leaned back in the chair, gasping for breath. A morbid sense of satisfaction seeped through the physical pain. I had done it. I had become a part of this place's history. I was the guy who threw a grenade in the toilet. A stupid title bought with blood and destruction, but in this distorted world, it was glory. Siren sounds began to wail in the distance, getting closer. The neighbors must have heard the explosion and called 911. I looked around my messy room. My life was about to change. There would be police interrogation, possibly jail time for illegal possession of an explosive device, and definitely a giant hospital bill along with the cost of repairing the house. I looked down at the wound on my leg, blood still soaking my faded jeans. Remorse began to set in belatedly, bitter and painful. Why did I do it? Just for the words of strangers, just for a little thrill in this meaningless life. I turned back to look at the screen one last time before the firefighters broke down the door and rushed in. The praises still danced on the screen. God tier, based. But as the screen light faded in my eyes due to dizziness, I realized how empty they were. They couldn't staunch my blood, they couldn't rebuild the toilet, and they certainly couldn't give me back my former hearing. The room door burst open. Flashlights swept across the room, rushing footsteps, voices shouting for me to put my hands up. I managed a pained, twisted smile. At least I hadn't lied. I closed my eyes, letting the darkness and the sirens swallow me. The image of the black hole where the toilet used to be still etched in my mind, a monument to my own great stupidity. The computer screen before me was a chaotic canvas of violence and fractured pixels. I had watched that video hundreds of times over the last 3 hours, obsessively rewinding every frame. It was footage from the Berkeley riot, an urban battlefield where opposing ideologies clashed with fists, sticks, and tear gas. But I didn't care about the politics. I didn't care which side was right or wrong. I only cared about the guy in black. He emerged from the chaotic crowd like a ghost, clad head to toe in the uniform of the Black Bloc. He moved quickly, decisively, and ruthlessly. In his hand was no banner or flag, but a solid steel U-lock bicycle lock, an improvised but deadly weapon. I clicked, slowing the video down to 0.25 speed. He approached a man kneeling, trying to intervene in the brawl. His arm swung high, tracing a perfect arc in the air. The steel lock crashed down. The kneeling man's head snapped back. Blood gushed out instantly. I could imagine the sound, the cold metal hitting a human skull, a dull, sickening thud. After the blow, he retreated into the crowd and vanished as if he had never existed. A perfect crime in broad daylight, concealed by chaos and a black cloth mask. But he made a mistake. He underestimated us. He underestimated the thousands of eyes glued to computer screens in dark rooms all over this world. He thought the crowd would shield him, but the crowd was precisely where he was exposed. We are Paul, the most terrifying open-source intelligence unit, and the hunt had begun. I opened specialized photo editing software, importing all the different video angles I had gathered from YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook Live. We had dozens of camera angles. My task was to synchronize them, creating a 3D space in my mind to track his every move. I created a new thread on the bulletin board. Others were doing the same. Data poured in constantly. A user from Germany just found a 4K quality clip. Another from Japan filtered the noise to clearly hear the surrounding voices. We worked like a programmed machine, requiring no command, only a common goal. He wore a black hoodie, dark jeans, and New Balance sneakers. I zoomed in on the shoes. Black New Balance with a white N logo. A small detail, but crucial. He wore sports-style sunglasses. A pen was clipped onto his hoodie pocket. I focused on his face. He wore a face covering, but during the scuffle, the cloth had slipped slightly, only for a tenth of a second. I clipped that frame. It was blurry, smeared by the quick movement, but it was all we needed. I applied filters to sharpen, increase contrast, and reduce graininess. The faint outline of a face emerged. A white man, high nose bridge, slightly pointed chin. I stared at his jawline structure. I memorized it. Next to me, the coffee had been cold for hours. The only sound in the room was the humming of the computer tower's cooling fans running at full capacity. I felt a cold excitement run down my spine, the feeling of a hunter tracking a wounded prey. Another user posted a shocking discovery. In another video, filmed while he was resting, his sunglasses reflected the image of the person filming. But more importantly, he had pulled his mask down to drink water. only for 2 seconds, but the camera caught it. I downloaded that video immediately, much clearer. I could distinctly see his face. Short-cut brown hair, an intellectual face, seemingly gentle, completely contradicting his savage action. Now for the cross-referencing step. We used custom-made facial recognition software, scanning millions of social media profiles in the San Francisco Bay Area. We searched for keywords related to education, philosophy, and radical left-wing politics. Why education? Because of how he dressed, the pen clipped to his pocket, and even the bike lock itself. It was the profile of someone working in an academic environment, a person who commuted by bicycle. Hours passed, my eyes were strained, but I didn't stop. The list of suspects gradually narrowed. Then a name appeared, Eric Clanton. A user found his profile on an OkCupid dating site. That face, unmistakable. I opened the 2 photos side by side on the screen. On one side, the killer holding the bike lock with a murderous look. On the other, the young professor with a gentle smile in his profile picture. I began detailed morphological analysis. Eyebrows, same. Nose bridge, same. Ear shape. This is the hardest feature to alter and is unique. I drew vector lines on the ear rims of both photos. Perfect match. I searched his name on Google. Eric Clanton, philosophy professor at Diablo Valley College. He taught ethics. The irony was bitter. A man standing at the podium teaching about righteousness, about goodness, was the one holding a weapon and smashing it into someone's head over political disagreement. I accessed the college's website, searching for old lectures, event photos. I found a picture of him posing with students. He was wearing a button-down shirt, and on the pocket, a pen, the same type as the pen in the riot video. I dug deeper, his Instagram, his Twitter accounts. He had deleted or locked most of them, but Google's cache doesn't lie. I found photos of him wearing those jeans, those New Balance shoes. Even the sunglasses appeared in a hiking photo. Everything was clear, no doubt remained. We had him. I compiled all the evidence into a massive infographic. Every guiding arrow, every comparison, every minute detail was presented scientifically and coldly. No need for verbal accusation. The images spoke for themselves. I posted it on the bulletin board. The thread exploded, thousands of shares. It spilled onto Twitter, Reddit, and news sites. The whole world began to call Eric Clanton by name. I leaned back in my chair, letting out a long sigh. Outside the window, the night sky was beginning to turn the gray color of dawn. I looked at the professor's face on the screen. He was smiling, the smug smile of someone who thought he was smarter than others, that he was morally superior. He didn't know that while he slept soundly, his life had been torn apart by the strangers he scorned. He used violence to silence others, to impose his ideology, and now he would face the consequences, not with violence but with truth. A few days later, the official news broke. Berkeley police arrested Eric Clanton. They searched his home and found the clothing, the sunglasses, and most importantly, the U-lock bicycle lock. He was charged with assault with a deadly weapon. I read the news report, feeling an empty satisfaction. Justice had been served in a way, but I didn't feel like a hero. I was just an observer, a chronicler of history through digital data. I looked down at my hands. These fingers didn't hold sticks or weapons. They only typed, but their destructive power was greater than any bike lock. They could strip a person naked, taking away their identity, career, and future in a single night. Eric Clanton lost everything. His teaching career ended, his reputation destroyed. He would face jail time, and the name Bike Lock Fugitive would be attached to him forever on the internet. That was the life sentence we gave him. I shut down the computer. The black screen reflected my tired face. I wondered if I would ever become a target. In this world, no one is invisible. Every trace we leave, every photo, every status update is a piece of a large puzzle that someone can put together at any time. I stood up and walked towards the bed. My weary body needed rest, but I knew as soon as I closed my eyes, the images of the riot of that brutal blow would still appear. And somewhere out there on the anonymous bulletin boards, a new hunt was about to begin. The machine never sleeps, and I am a part of it, whether I want to be or not. The distant wail of a police siren reminded me that the real world still existed parallel to the virtual one I had just immersed myself in. A world full of Eric Clantons, people wearing masks and hunters in the dark like me. No one is entirely good in this story. There are only predators and prey, and tonight the prey was caught. The winter of 2012 was colder than usual. Wind whistled through the window cracks of my top-floor apartment, carrying the dampness and loneliness of a city sinking into sleep. But in this room, time and climate ceased to exist. There was only the blinking blue light from the 3 computer screens arranged in an arc, creating a digital fortress that separated me from the real world. I was an addict of decryption, not the kind that solves crossword puzzles on a Sunday newspaper, but complex encryption algorithms, zero-day vulnerabilities, the secrets buried deep under the ice of the internet's iceberg. I wandered through hacker forums, anonymous bulletin boards, searching for a challenge worthy of the intellect I prided myself on possessing, the arrogance of a smart but lost soul. On a night in January, destiny appeared in the form of a simple JPEG image file on 4chan's Xboard. Black background, white text, the stylized image of a cicada. The message was short and provocative. Hello, we are looking for highly intelligent individuals. To find them, we have devised a test. There is a message hidden in this image. Find it, and it will lead you on the path to finding us. We look forward to meeting the few who will make it all the way. Good luck, 3301. Hundreds of comments below mocked it as a prank, a clumsy NSA recruitment attempt, or simply trash. But I did not. My gut told me something was different here. The minimalism, the cold tone, and the structure of the image suggested a frightening professionalism. I downloaded the image. The file name seemed random, but I knew nothing was random in this world. I opened the file with Notepad, a basic trick to view the image's raw source code. Most of it was gibberish, but at the very end an English sentence appeared, neatly placed like a secret greeting. Tiberius Claudius Caesar says, LXXT 33 emptum Q kiftogiasq 3Q equals WO20K. Caesar cipher, one of the oldest encryption techniques. I smiled. The first test was a filter to eliminate the lazy ones. I applied the character shift rule according to the number 4, corresponding to Emperor Claudius's position in Roman history. A link appeared. My heart pounded faster. I had taken the bait. The link led to another image, this time a rubber duck with the sarcastic caption, "Oops, this is just a decoy. It seems you couldn't figure out how to get the message out of the original image." Disappointment surged but was immediately replaced by exhilaration. They were challenging me. Get the message out of the original image. So there was more than just the Caesar cipher, something else. Steganography, the technique of hiding information within an image. I used the Outguess tool, specialized software for detecting hidden data in media files. I scanned the original picture again. This time it spat out a string of data, a link to a website on Reddit. The real game began. The Reddit page was full of posts with meaningless characters and numbers, but to me, they were the notes in a chaotic symphony. I recognized these numbers as a form of a book code. To decode it, I needed to find the key book. The clue was in the titles of the posts, referencing kings and Arthurian legends. After 3 hours of scouring the digital library of the Gutenberg Project, I found it. The Mabinogion, a collection of Welsh mythological tales. I applied the numerical code to the book. A new message appeared, cold and precise. Call this phone number. I looked at the number on the screen, a phone number with a Texas area code. I picked up my phone, my fingers slightly trembling. It was 3 a.m. Who was I calling? An intelligence organization, a cult, or a serial killer looking for his next victim through the internet? I pressed call. The phone rang for a long time, then a robotic voice came from the other end. Not a real person. It was an answering machine. Very good, you have done well. There are 3 prime numbers associated with the original image final, JPG. 3301 is one of them. You must find the other 2. Multiply all 3 numbers together and add com to find the next step. Good luck. Goodbye. The long beep left a chilling silence in the room. 3 prime numbers. I returned to the original image. I measured its dimensions, 509 pixels wide and 503 pixels high. Both were prime numbers. 3301 was also a prime number. I multiplied them together. $509 emes 503 emes 3301 equals $845,140,527. I typed that sequence of numbers into the browser address bar, adding the com suffix. A website appeared, nothing but the image of a countdown clock and a giant cicada. The clock was ticking down to 0. 24 hours remained. I couldn't sleep. I sat guard over the screen like a soldier drinking cup after cup of coffee. My mind reeled with theories. Who was Cicada 3301? Why were they doing this? The complexity of the puzzles demanded deep knowledge of cryptography, classical literature, mathematics, and even information hiding techniques. No single individual could have created this game. This was the work of a collective. When the clock struck 0, the website changed. It displayed a series of GPS coordinates. 14 coordinates scattered across the world: Warsaw, Paris, Seattle, Seoul, Arizona, California, Sydney. I looked at the list. One of them was in Seattle, a 4-hour drive from where I lived. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my jacket, car keys, and rushed out of the house. It was still dark outside. Rain began to fall, mixing with melting snow to form a slick layer of slush on the highway. I drove like a maniac, passing roaring trucks, my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I arrived at the specified coordinates just as dawn was breaking. It was a deserted neighborhood, with bare wooden utility poles standing along the sidewalk. I got out of the car, the bone-chilling cold piercing through my thin jacket. I walked along the row of poles, my eyes searching for a sign. And then I saw it. Taped to a rotten wooden pole was a simple white sheet of paper with the image of a cicada and a large black QR code. No writing, just the QR code. I pulled out my phone, my hands shaking with cold and excitement. I scanned the code. It led to another image. The text appeared: "You have shared too much with the unworthy. We want the best, not the followers. This is the final opportunity." I understood their meaning. On the forums, people were sharing the answers publicly. The lazy ones were freeloading off the efforts of decoders like me. Cicada 3301 was displeased. They wanted the elite. They wanted discretion. The new message contained a web address hidden deep within the Tor network, deep web. I returned to my car, opened my laptop. I connected via the Tor network, typing the long onion address. The website that appeared was terrifyingly minimalist. Only one input field requested my PGP, pretty good privacy, email address. PGP is a method of email encryption that guarantees absolute privacy. I entered my secure email address and pressed submit. "We will be in touch." That line of text was all I received. Then the website vanished. I drove home in a daze. Had the journey ended, or had it just begun? I had reached the end of the puzzles, touched the paper taped to the utility pole in Seattle, and sent my digital identity into the shadows. The following days were a mental torture. I checked my email every 5 minutes. I didn't dare take my eyes off the screen. I skipped meals, showers, living in exhausting anticipation. I imagined what awaited me: an invitation to join the Illuminati, a position at the Central Intelligence Agency, or a plan to change the world order. And then the email arrived. The subject was empty. The content was encrypted with my public key. I used my private key to decrypt it. "Welcome, you are one of the few who have made it here. We are not a hacker group. We are not a political organization. We are an international group of people who believe that privacy is a fundamental human right. We develop tools to protect that right. We need people like you." Below was a link leading to a private chat server. I hovered my mouse over the link. This was the decisive moment. If I clicked, I would step into a world from which I could not turn back. I would become part of the shadow. I would have to live a double life. But just as my finger was about to press the mouse, the screen went black. Not a power outage. The lights in the room were still on. Only my computer had shut down. I tried to restart it, but to no avail. The hard drive had been completely wiped. I sat there stunned. I looked into the pitch-black screen that reflected my haggard face. What had happened? Where had I gone wrong? Or was this the final test? My phone vibrated. A text message from an unknown number with no sender ID. "Patience is a virtue, but excessive curiosity is a trap. You were too late. We have found the necessary number of people. Continue to live your life. Do not try to find us again. 3301. A coldness spread from the top of my head to my heels. I had been too slow. Or perhaps I had been eliminated for some reason I would never know. Maybe because I hesitated. Maybe because I had shared some small clue on social media earlier. Or perhaps they realized I did not fit their ideal. I sat there in the dark, listening to the building's ventilation fan whirring. The feeling of failure was heavier than anything I had ever experienced. I had touched the greatest secret of the underground world, but the door had slammed shut right in my face. A few weeks later, Cicada 3301 posted a final public notice on 4chan. We have found the individuals we were looking for. This year's journey ends. After that, silence. I returned to my normal life, but nothing was normal anymore. I went to work, I ate, I slept, but my mind still lingered on those Seattle streets, next to that rotten utility pole. I started seeing patterns everywhere. In the noise of the subway, in the serial numbers on banknotes, in the morning birdsong. I wondered if it was another test. Were they watching me? Cicada 3301 had vanished, but they left a scar on the minds of participants like me. A scar of obsession. I knew they were still out there, in the shadow of the deep web, building tools to change the world or destroy it. And I, the one left behind, could only stand on the sidelines and watch. Sometimes on sleepless nights, I would open Notepad again, typing out meaningless Caesar cipher lines, hoping that one day, a cicada would appear on the screen and invite me to a new game. But the screen remained a static black. The silence of the prime numbers is the loneliest sound in the world. My office at the headquarters of the Submerged Investigation Bureau was steeped in the artificial cold from the central air conditioning system. The stark white fluorescent light reflected off the metal desk, where 3 computer monitors displayed lines of code and numerous browser windows. I am an intelligence analyst, a hunter without a gun. My weapons are algorithms and endless patience as I wade through the internet's darkest swamps. My mission is not to catch bank robbers or drug lords, but to seek out the ticking time bombs hidden behind the keyboards in quiet suburban homes. It all began on a dreary afternoon in February. Our keyword alert system glowed red. An account on the social media platform iFunny, a seemingly harmless meme-sharing site but also a haven for extremist ideologies, had posted alarming content. The account name was Army of Christ. Such a name reeking of religious extremism was not uncommon, but the content he posted was different. I opened the file. A series of posts flashed before my eyes. It wasn't just common racist jokes or offensive memes. He spoke of Waco. He spoke of shooting up Planned Parenthood offices. And most disturbingly, he discussed shooting federal agents on sight. Never comply with gun laws, stockpile arms, shoot every federal agent on sight. That line sent a chill down my spine. In our world, there is a fine line between shitposting for attention and actual threats. Most online perpetrators are paper tigers, hiding behind a screen to vent their frustrations. But my professional instinct told me this one wasn't joking. His way of talking about firearms showed technical knowledge. His expression of hatred was systematic and goal-oriented. I began the identification process. For amateurs, online anonymity is just an illusion. He left a digital trail everywhere. I traced the IP addresses of the posts. It led to a house in Boardman, Ohio, a typical middle-class neighborhood where the lawns were neatly mowed and cars were parked tidily in the driveways. The owner of the internet connection was a middle-aged man, but demographic records showed he lived with an 18-year-old son, Justin Olson. I looked at Justin's ID photo in the database system. A young face, short hair, eyes looking straight ahead but lacking warmth. 18 years old. The age when one should be worried about choosing a university or dating a girlfriend. But Justin was different. He was busy building a fortress of hatred in virtual space. We began comprehensive surveillance. All of Justin's activities were under scrutiny. He wasn't just active on iFunny. He was also an active member of anonymous forums where he exchanged tactics, discussed weapons types, and shared white supremacist ideologies. He glorified the Oklahoma City bombing. He venerated mass murderers as martyrs. The most terrifying thing was his normalcy in real life. He wasn't a social outcast or someone with a criminal record. He lived with his father, went to school, and caused no local trouble. This contrast was our nightmare. The most dangerous lone wolves are those who look exactly like sheep until they bare their fangs. August arrived, bringing stifling heat and mounting tension. Justin's posts became increasingly specific and violent. He no longer spoke in general terms. He started talking about being ready. He boasted about his arsenal. We couldn't wait any longer. If he decided to turn words into action, the consequences would be catastrophic. An emergency search warrant was approved by the court. That morning, the Ohio sky was leaden gray. I sat in the command van, parked 2 blocks away from Justin's house. Through the surveillance camera footage worn by the SWAT agents, I watched them move silently like ghosts, approaching the target. The house was quiet in its slumber, completely unaware of the storm about to hit. Alpha team in position, ready to breach. The crackling voice over the radio shattered the silence in the van. I held my breath. This is always the most dangerous moment. If Justin truly had guns and was ready for a standoff as he claimed online, my colleagues could be hurt. I'll execute. A loud bang echoed as the door was smashed open, shouts demanding surrender, the heavy thump of footsteps on the wooden floor. I was glued to the screen. Justin was subdued in the living room, still drowsy, wearing only shorts. He looked much smaller and weaker than the holy warrior image he had crafted online. He was trembling, his face pale, repeatedly asking what was happening. But my attention wasn't on him. I directed the search team to move upstairs, into his bedroom and other areas of the house. Justin's father was also detained, completely panicked and unable to understand why the FBI was raiding his home. Central, we found a locked room on the second floor, an agent reported. Breach the lock, I ordered, my heart pounding. The door burst open, flashlights swept across the dark room, and then all of us fell silent. It was not a normal bedroom. It was a miniature military armory. Guns were on shelves and scattered across the floor. So many guns. I started counting through the monitor. A homemade AR-15, assault rifles of various types, shotguns, handguns, a total of 15 assorted firearms, but that wasn't all. The agents opened metal containers stacked in the corner of the room. Ammunition. Thousands of rounds. They gleamed with a cold copper sheen under the flashlight beams. 10,000 rounds. Enough to cause a large-scale massacre. Enough to turn a shopping mall or a school into a living hell in minutes. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my throat. This kid was only 18. Where did he get all these weapons? Where did he get the money? And most importantly, what did he intend to use them for? The answer was already in his posts. He wasn't collecting guns to hunt deer. He was collecting them to hunt people. In addition to the firearms, we found military camouflage clothing, bulletproof vests, and backpacks packed and ready as if he were preparing for battle at any moment. On his computer desk, browser tabs were still open, leading to extremist websites. I stepped out of the command van, taking a deep breath of the damp morning air. Justin was being escorted to an armored vehicle. He kept his head down, avoiding the gaze of curious neighbors peeking from behind their curtains. I looked at him, trying to find a sign of a monster. But no, he was just an ordinary young man with a face dotted with acne. That was the most frightening thing. Evil in the digital age does not wear the face of the devil. It wears the face of the kid next door. In the interrogation room, Justin tried to deny his intent. He claimed it was all a joke, that the threats to shoot federal agents were just trash talk for fun, part of an online culture that old people like us wouldn't understand. He said the gun collection belonged to his father, or that he only bought them for a hobby. It's just a joke, come on. He repeated the phrase multiple times, his voice shaking, his eyes darting back and forth. I sat across from him, placing the thick file of evidence on the table, screenshots of his posts, photos of the 10,000 rounds of ammunition found in his room. 10,000 rounds of ammunition is not a joke, Justin, I said, my voice low and cold. 15 assault rifles are not comedy props. You weren't preparing for a show. You were preparing for a war. He fell silent. The online arrogance had completely vanished, leaving only the fear of a child caught doing something wrong. But this wasn't about stealing cookies. This was a domestic terrorism plot. I looked deep into his eyes. I wondered what turned an 18-year-old boy into this. Loneliness, brainwashing by social media algorithms, or the longing to belong to some group, even a group of haters. He had found a purpose in life through hating others, and the internet had provided him with the tools to nurture that hatred into a real monster. Justin Olson's case was quickly brought to light. He was charged with making federal threats and illegal possession of firearms. His lawyers tried to argue it was freedom of speech, that he hadn't actually harmed anyone, but the judge and jury disagreed. The sheer volume of weapons and the specific nature of the threats were undeniable evidence of the potential danger he represented. I returned to the office late that evening. The room was still cold and saturated with blue light. I sat down in my chair, exhausted. We had averted a tragedy. There would be no news report about a shooting in Boardman, no list of victims, no memorial candles and flowers. That was our victory, a silent, invisible victory. But as I looked at the computer screen, where millions of messages continued to stream every second, I knew the war was not over. Justin Olson was just one of thousands, tens of thousands of other names hiding in the shadows. They were still typing, still sharing toxic memes, still silently stockpiling ammunition in basements and bedrooms across this country. I opened a new file. Another account had just posted an image of a government building floor plan with a vague accompanying caption. The process began again: identification, surveillance, risk assessment. I picked up my cold coffee and took a sip. The bitter taste spread in my mouth. I recalled the look in Justin's father's eyes when he saw the arsenal in his son's room, a look of shock and collapse. He had lived with a terrorist right under his roof without knowing it. The world has changed. Brick walls and locked doors no longer prevent danger from entering our homes. The danger now travels through fiber optic cables, creeps into the minds of lonely children, turning them into time bombs. And I, the bomb disposal expert, can only hope that I will always be one step ahead of them. Just one step is enough to keep this world from exploding. It's going to be a long night, and out there, the wolves are still howling for their pack. Paris is the city of light. That's what the tourist brochures and romantic couples whisper to each other. But for me and a small group of other eccentrics, the true beauty of Paris lies not in the dazzling Eiffel Tower or the grand boulevards. It lies 20 meters deep underground, in the eternal darkness of the Empire of the Dead. We call ourselves cataphiles, those obsessed with the gigantic system of catacombs, interwoven like rotten roots beneath the glamorous asphalt. I have spent 3 years studying the map of this labyrinth, not the neat tourist map that leads you to see orderly stacked walls of bones. I'm talking about the map of the forbidden zones, the off-the-books areas that even the Parisian police hesitate to enter. My goal tonight is a legend, a video clip that circulated on underground forums and even 4chan not long ago. The footage showed a panicked man running away from something invisible in the catacombs, dropping his camera and disappearing. People said he had discovered the gates of hell. People said he died. I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in curiosity. I want to find that path again. I slid the heavy cast iron manhole cover aside, the metal grating against the concrete screeching loudly in the silent alley of the 14th arrondissement. Cold, damp air rose, carrying the smell of mold and old earth, the smell of death. I lowered myself onto the rusty iron ladder, pulling the manhole cover back over my head. The yellow street light vanished, replaced by a thick darkness. I switched on the headlamp attached to my forehead, the white beam cutting through the dusty space. The journey began. The first tunnels were quite spacious, the walls reinforced with squarely cut limestone. These were the main routes that cataphiles often frequented for parties or graffiti. I passed by the scribbled drawings, the empty beer bottles rolling on the soggy, muddy floor, but I wouldn't stay here. I turned into a narrow, small niche, where the tunnel ceiling was so low I had to bend double. The deeper I went, the thinner and heavier the air became. The sounds of the city above completely disappeared. No more car noises, no more subway horns. Only the squelching sound of my rubber boots wading through ankle-deep water and the echo of my own breath off the cold stone walls. I followed the specific symbols I had noted from the video. A crossroads marked with a drawing of a one-eyed cat, a collapsed section of the tunnel that required crawling through, and finally, the chamber filled with human bones piled up haphazardly, not neatly arranged as in the tourist section. I stopped before the pile of bones. Thousands of empty skulls stared back at me. Dark eye sockets seemed to judge the intruder. I felt a shiver run down my spine, not from fear, but from a mixture of awe and revulsion. This was the resting place of 6 million Parisians across centuries. I was walking on their graves. I continued moving. The map in my head began to blur. The other man's video ended in an area with endlessly narrow and long corridors, identical to each other. I realized I was entering that zone. Stark white limestone walls, a low-hanging ceiling, and a black, waterlogged floor. The silence here had a physical weight. It pressed against my eardrums, creating illusory ringing sounds. I started hearing strange noises. Water dripping sounded like stealthy footsteps. The wind whistling through a crack sounded like whispering. I knew it was catacomb madness, a psychological phenomenon where the brain tries to fill the silence with false data. I shook my head hard to clear those thoughts. Suddenly, I saw an object lying in the mud. I bent down, using my hand to brush the slick mud aside. It was an old handheld video camera. The plastic casing was cracked, the lens covered in mud. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it, the missing man's camera. So he had truly been here, and he left it behind. Why would an explorer leave his recording equipment? There could only be one reason. He was running for his life. I picked up the camera and put it in my backpack. This trophy was enough to make me a legend on the forums. But just then, my headlamp flickered. I froze. This was a professional lamp, the batteries brand new. There was no reason for it to fail. I tapped the lamp lightly. It came back on, but dimmer than before. The darkness around me seemed to thicken, ready to swallow my fragile circle of light. Then I heard it. Not dripping waters, not the wind, but breathing. It came from the corridor in front of me, right at the boundary between light and shadow. Heavy, labored breathing, like someone with a chronic lung disease, or something that had been down here so long it forgot how humans breathe. I held my breath and switched off the flashlight. Absolute darkness enveloped me. I wanted to pinpoint the source of the sound. In the pitch black, every one of my senses was strained like a taut wire. The breathing came again, closer this time, and accompanied by the sound of shuffling steps on the wet stone floor. Swish, swish. Primal fear exploded in my brain. This was not an illusion. Someone or something was here with me. I turned the flashlight back on, aiming it straight ahead. Nothing, just the endless white limestone corridor. But I didn't wait to check further. Survival instinct screamed at me to get out immediately. I turned and ran. I ran headlong through the narrow corridors, water splashing onto my clothes. My backpack slammed against my back painfully. I dared not look behind me. I just ran. My own footsteps echoed everywhere, creating a chaotic symphony that made it impossible to distinguish between my sound and the sound of my pursuer. I turned left, then right. I tried to recall the way I came, but panic blurred every memory. Every turn looked identical. Limestone, human bones, black water. I was lost. The thought struck me harder than a punch. Being lost in the Paris catacombs meant death. A slow death in the darkness, starving and going mad. I stopped, leaning my back against the cold stone wall, trying to regulate my breathing. I had to stay calm. Panic is the fastest killer. I pulled the compass from my pocket. The needles spun wildly. There must be iron ore or a strong magnetic field in this area. The compass was useless. I looked up at the tunnel ceiling. There was an old graffiti inscription, written in black charcoal, Nox, night. I remembered from my research documents that this symbol often led to deeper areas, lower levels. I had taken the wrong turn. I had gone down instead of up. The shuffling sound came again, this time from the turn immediately to my left, very close. I had no other choice. I dashed to the right into a tunnel so narrow that my shoulders scraped painfully against the stone walls. I squeezed through it like a sewer rat. The tunnel sloped downwards, deeper and deeper. The air became stifling, severely lacking in oxygen. My head began to throb. My flashlight flickered again and died completely. I slammed it in vain. Light up, please light up. It flashed a small, weak yellow light, like a candle in the wind. That light was enough for me to see what was ahead. I was standing in a large circular chamber. The floor was dry, and in the center of the room, stacked in a spiral shape up to the ceiling, were bones. Tens of thousands of femurs and skulls arranged artistically and morbidly. But what stunned me wasn't the bones. It was the drawings on the walls, drawings made with dried blood or something similar reddish-brown. They depicted screaming figures, wide-open eyes, and strangely detailed catacomb maps. This was someone's dwelling, or had been. I backed up, my foot kicked something, a clinking sound. I bent down to shine the light. It was another flashlight, broken. Next to it was a sneaker, a relatively new shoe. I recognized the shoe. In the missing man's video, he was wearing shoes exactly like this. So he had reached this point. He didn't disappear the moment he dropped the camera. He ran all the way here. And then what? Where was he? I shone the light around the room, searching for traces of a body. There were no corpses, only bones from the 18th century. Perhaps he found an exit, or perhaps he became part of that bone pile. A gust of icy wind blew across the back of my neck. My weak flashlight went out completely, this time permanently. Darkness swallowed me whole. I stood rooted to the spot, closing my eyes to acclimate to the darkness. I heard the breathing sound again, right next to my ear, so close, I could feel the cold breath on my face. I didn't scream, my throat was tight. I swung my arm and punched hard into the void in a sheer panic. My hand hit the stone wall. No one was there. I fumbled for the lighter in my pocket. This was my last source of light. The tiny flame flared up, trembling. In the flickering firelight, I saw a narrow crevice on the ceiling, about 2 meters from the ground. A light current of air was blowing down from it. Fresh air, air from the surface. Hope surged violently. I put the lighter in my mouth, biting down hard, tasting the cold metal. I grabbed onto the jagged stone outcroppings on the bone wall, starting to climb. The human bones were brittle and fragile under my weight. The cracking sound of breaking bones sounded like small firecrackers. I wriggled up, reaching for the edge of the crevice. My fingers touched the stone lip. I pulled my body up with all my might. The heavy backpack weighed me down, but I dared not abandon it. The camera was inside. I squeezed half my body into the crevice. It was an old ventilation shaft, narrow and dusty. I crawled on my elbows and knees, feeling like I was being buried alive in a stone coffin. I crawled on, I don't know for how long, 10 minutes or an hour. My knees were bleeding, my elbows scraped. The lighter was so hot it blistered my lip, but I didn't dare let go. Finally, I saw a faint blue light ahead, moonlight. I mustered the last of my strength to crawl towards it. The vent was blocked by a rusted iron grate. I kicked it hard with my foot. Once, twice. The grate sprang loose, falling onto the grass below. I rolled out, landing with a thud on the soft, damp ground of a park. Fresh air flooded my lungs, sweet and sharp. I lay on my back, looking up at the stars twinkling through the tree leaves. I was in Montparnasse Cemetery. I had surfaced right in the middle of the city. I touched my pocket. The lighter was still there, hot. I checked my backpack. The camera was still there. I had survived. I sat up, looking back at the dark hole I had just emerged from. It looked like the gaping mouth of the earth, silent and harmless under the moonlight, but I knew what was hidden beneath. I returned home as dawn was breaking. I connected the recovered camera to my computer. The data inside was badly corrupted by the humidity, but I managed to restore the last few clips. The image shook violently, labored breathing, and then, for a brief second when the man turned around, the camera light shone into a dark corner. There was no monster there, no ghost. Just a mirror, a large old mirror propped against the tunnel wall. The reflection in the mirror was the face of the camera holder himself, distorted by fear, his eyes wide with madness. He had been running from his own shadow. He had scared himself to death in the solitude of the catacombs. I turned off the computer. The cold feeling washed over me again. I remembered the breathing near my ear, the footsteps chasing me. If that man was running from himself, then what was chasing me? I didn't see any mirror, and I was certain that, as I climbed the vent, a cold hand had tried to grab my heel. I looked down at my shoe. On the heel was a distinct, elongated finger-shaped smudge of mud. The Paris catacombs don't need ghosts to be terrifying. They only need silence to awaken the monsters sleeping in your mind. And sometimes, just sometimes, those monsters are real. I will never go back there. But I know that a part of my soul has been permanently kept in the darkness beneath Paris, wandering the white bone corridors, waiting for the next curious fool.